Ladies and gentlemen, we are not far from Andrew Painter mania absolutely sweeping the nation. The top Phillies prospect has been pushed up to AAA and is progressing at the exact rate the organization designed. I do want to project on what his exact timeline is, the quotes that we have from Dave Dombrowski about when he could make his major league debut and what his role could look like on this Phillies team. It does feel like we are closer than ever, and this is a guy that could be a difference maker, probably not for this season, but certainly for the next decade of Phillies baseball. But do want to talk about exactly what he brings to the table, as we are well aware that he is the top pitching prospect in this Phillies organization, a guy that has been looked at incredibly highly for quite some time, and they are being a little bit cautious in his approach. So do want to dive into what we've seen. As I mentioned, he has been pushed up to AAA and made his debut at that current point. So do want to reflect on what we saw, a couple quotes buzzing around, and everything else in the world of Andrew Painter. But before I do that, do want to remind you guys, as always, to make sure you are hitting that subscribe button. Only 26.3% of you guys watching these videos have subscribed to us here at Phillies Digest just yet. We got plenty of good baseball to break down, a lot of action to get into, and of course the exciting news surrounding this Phillies team, which starts with Andrew Painter at this current point. So to start off with, I do want to highlight exactly what he brought to the table in his AAA debut. Not a ton to go through here. That he pitched 60 pitches, went through 3 innings, allowed 1 hit, 0 earned runs, 3 walks, 5 strikeouts, 34 of which were strikes. So not exactly the ball to strike ratio that you do hope for there. And I will acknowledge that he did pitch himself out of a jam. He walked the bases loaded, ultimately bared down and did get through that inning, which I thought was something that showed a little bit of character from him. Nice to see that there is some gutsiness, as I do think that's something that is hard to, identify in a pitcher there. There are guys that obviously have the talent, but don't have quite the pitching feel. A guy like Jesus Luzardo has really impressed me this year for sort of his just guts to pitch and get through tough innings. I would love to see Andrew Painter develop those characteristics. I'm obviously not throwing that type of category on him after one AAA appearance there, but a positive sign nonetheless. And our very own Garrett Stubbs was speaking about him after the game, and I did want to pull up this exact quote from here. And he said, quote, "Before the game, I told him, look, there's going to be at least one time during the game where something doesn't go the way that we want it to. And something is going to happen, that you're going to have to be a man and be a competitor and figure it out. Figure your way out of it." Garrett Stubbs on Andrew Painter dealing with adversity in his first start with the Iron Pigs. And for starters, I think it is pretty awesome that Stubbs is the guy managing him. I get in the minor leagues, there's always all these guys fighting for their jobs, and Stubbs is still in that position, that he obviously would much prefer to be at the major league level and be on this Phillies team. And frankly, how Rafael Marchand has been performing, it would not shock me if that does happen this year, as I've been vastly disappointed with the Phillies basically handing him on a platter, saying, go earn this backup catcher spot, be a rotational guy so we can save JT's legs a little bit. And Marchand is just absolutely struggling, particularly at the plate. I believe last night, at the time of me recording this, was his second time on base since April started. That is just not good enough for a guy who's supposed to bring a little bit more pop. We know what Stubbs can do defensively in managing a pitcher. It is the bat that is a factor, and that is why Marchand was really looked at as the option to be called up this year. But with that said, the fact that Stubbs is the good glove guy and does have a little bit of feel for the pitching staff is a really good thing for Painter, just kind of settling in at the minor league level there. And I do think it's a pretty awesome thing that he is the guy handling it. A lot more experience than you're going to get in a lot of those situations. Now, when talking about Painter a little bit more specifically here, I do want to acknowledge what he brings from the table from the overall standpoint. So obviously you can see the game summary on the left here, a little bit more advanced profile, that there were 8 whiffs, a 36.4% whiff percentage, a 30.6% chase percentage, pretty solid there. And you can see kind of the breakdown. The game notes that I do want to read into here, that Painter cruised through the first 2 innings as he retired 6 of the first 7 batters, one of them being the top prospect, Roman Anthony, on a strikeout. I will note that the curveball seems to be his strikeout or his get-out pitch at this current point. It looked pretty filthy from what I saw. There was one in particular that really dropped out of the zone, and I think absolutely would play at the major league level, but not as polished as maybe I was hopeful here. And I will get into the timeline in a second, but we can see the pitching arsenal in the top right here, that he does have the 4-seam. He does have the cutter, the curveball, which, as I mentioned, is that get-out pitch. That is going to be that whiff rate, that strikeout pitch that put hitters away, and, of course, the changer as well. So kind of a 4-pitch guy. The arsenal notes that we'll throw together, and by the way, a great job on this graphic here. The cutter lost 2.9 of induced vertical break. Just pretty impressive stuff. I like this breakdown. You guys can dive into it a little bit more. And then to talk a little bit more about his timeline here, I guess, is the most important factor. There does seem to be differing opinions from a lot of people for the management here. Obviously, Andrew Painter is labeled a starting pitcher. There is no doubt about that, and not just labeled as a starting pitcher. The hope is that this guy can grow into a legitimate ace in the organization, and it is not just Dave Dombrowski speaking that with lip service. There are other general managers around the MLB who have essentially said the same thing. I've read a couple of scouting reports that have had some pretty glowing comparisons, and I also always want to mention he's a big dude, Andrew Painter. Real deal, 6'7", and looks every bit of it. He looks like a grown man, and frankly handles himself like one as well from every interview and everything else that I have watched with him. Now, when speaking about the timeline here, we do have these quotes from Dave Dombrowski that I did want to reflect back on. This, of course, came during spring training, so a couple months away at this point, and he was asked and said, quote, "We could go quicker. I think all of us feel from a health perspective that he could go quicker than that, but we're also trying to combine coming back from his injury while trying to preserve innings for later in the season. If you go too quickly, then you're going to burn the innings that you would want to use later. That's why we're going slower. We hope that he's capable of being added to the big league roster to help us, but we have a good pitching staff too, so he has to earn it. He has to go out and do it. There are examples of highly touted pitching prospects beginning their MLB careers as relievers before joining the rotation. David Price and Garrett Crochet immediately come to mind. Is there any chance, ... Quote, "Painter is not going to pitch out of the bullpen," Dombrowski said. "He's not built to do that. He's a young pitcher, a starting pitcher. There's also an adjustment phase to doing something like that. We're building him up. He's just too good of a prospect." And for this kind of theory here, I sort of disagree with that. When you think about what Painter can bring to the table, I think the best case for his development would be for him to get a taste of the postseasons, get in that action, and realistically, there's not really a pathway for him doing that as a starter. When you think about the rotation and how it's going to be trimmed down, I mean, we may not even see a guy like Jesus Luzardo pitch in the postseason setting. Ranger Suarez probably will not be starting in this season. We will see how things break out, how Aaron Nola is looking at that point, and we will have those conversations when we get there. But the point being, I don't really see any room for Andrew Painter being a part of that. At the minimum, I would love for him to be an option out of the postseason that you can go to. And again, to get that sense of playoff baseball, which is important, you have to have this guy performing. And I also think if we're so worried about innings limits, the bullpen is the best way to control that. You can ensure he's only pitching an inning here, or you can do 2 innings here, or whatever your game plan that you have mapped out that is the best case for his arm. I think you can execute that exact same thing. Now, I understand the premise that it's obviously a different approach coming out of the bullpen from, not having the start of the game or full control. All those kind of factors are a part of it, and the mentality is certainly a little different, but I don't think to the point where it would mess a guy up. I think there's more success stories than failures for guys who started in the bullpen and then transitioned to a starter. And we're seeing, honestly, more and more of that across the major leagues for guys that are fluid. We've seen plenty of guys who have flamed out as starting pitchers and then gone to the bullpen, revived themselves. Jeff Hoffman, a clear example of that, of a guy who was not good enough from a starting pitcher perspective, but has looked pretty dominant as a reliever, although he has struggled of late. Now, when speaking about the exact timeline, we don't have an exact answer here, but this is the closest thing that we do have. Not only did Dombrowski have plenty of good things to say about the right-hander, but added that Painter could be up in July. A July call-up would give the Phillies a positive addition on the bump right before the team looks to amp up for the postseason. There could be concerns about bringing in the youngster right before the postseason, but it also might be the best time to do so. If Painter will be the type of arm that the Phillies are hoping for the future, they need him to be ready to go into pressure situations. Plenty of that has to happen over the next few months, and of course, how he performs in the minors will likely determine when he gets called up, but signs have been positive, and that's all the Phillies can ask for. The only way I see this sort of working out, and I've been pretty heavy on this idea, still believe very firmly in it, is if you do expand to the 6-man starting rotation there. I think that makes a ton of sense for preserving arms from the postseason setting here, and obviously injuries can happen. We never want to root for them, certainly hope that is never the case, but that could be a factor as well. It is good that the Phillies are making him earn it. It is really positive, sort of the results that we've seen to this point. He is sort of living up to the hype at this current moment, but the MLB is that ultimate test that he will have to pass there. There's a lot of guys who looked like the most dominant minor league player ever, and then ultimately has not translated to the major league level. I don't believe that Andrew Painter is going to fit in that category whatsoever, but I do think getting a look at him in the majors should be something pretty clear-cut on the goals for the Phillies this season. So we're getting closer and closer to the Andrew Painter experience arriving at the major league level, and do hope that that happens in the semi-near future. I'm okay with July, even though I'm a little bit anxious, would prefer it a little sooner here. I just want to see what this guy can fully do, because it is going to impact a lot of the decisions moving forward. Ranger Suarez is going to be a free agent, likely going to get paid by somebody if it is not the Phillies there. And obviously, he's a guy that fits that little flex role of can go in the bullpen, can be a starter as well. We'll see what ultimately unfolds from there. But Andrew Painter mania will be arriving in Philadelphia, maybe sooner than a lot of people want to believe there. But do want to hear from you guys in the comments. Most particularly, the question that I do want to ask is your thoughts on the reliever conversation. For me, I think the best way to manage him from here would be to call him up at the tail end of the season, go to the 6-man rotation, preserve some arms, and then use him as a bullpen arm come playoff time if he looks the part. If you disagree with that, would love to hear exactly why. I don't quite agree with Dave Dombrowski on the dead set not using him as a bullpen arm, but you feel free to try and convince me in the comments. And as always, do want to remind you guys to make sure you are hitting that subscribe button. That 73.7% of you guys watching these videos have not subscribed to us here at Phillies Digest just yet, so make sure you're hitting that button, dropping a like, dropping your comments below. I'll be back talking to you next time. Peace.